Hi, and welcome to Design Conversations from AIJ Philadelphia. I'm Bernardo Margulis, and we are in Drexel University at the Urban Annex, and today we'll be talking to my dear friend, Debbie Millman, who is a great designer in New York. You have an impressive list of achievements, one of which is President of AIJ National, which is a very prestigious honor in and of itself, but more so if we consider you're only one of 5 female presidents that we've had in the 100 plus years of the organization. That is 5 out of 53 presidents. Why do you think we have such disparity, and do you think it's affected your term?
I think that the disparity is not dissimilar to the general disparity of the roles that women had all through the 1900s. In fact, I don't know if you're aware of a designer named C.P. Pinellas. She was a very, very famous designer, mid-century designer into the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even the early 90s. And she was a pioneer in magazine design, branding, education. She was also the wife of Bill Golden, who designed the CBS logo. She actually helped him get that job. She was the first woman inducted into the Art Directors Club, and that was in the 60s. And that was only at Bill's insistence. So given that she was the first member of the Art Directors Club in the 60s, and there was already one president at that point of AIGA that was a woman, and now since, obviously, 4 more, I don't think it's really that dissimilar from the times. Women just didn't have as many positions of power outside of the household. So I think that the fact that AIGA has as many women presidents as it's had in the last couple of decades is wonderful, and we just need a lot more.
So we are actually ahead of the trend compared to others.
I don't know if we're ahead of the trend. I'm probably trying to see things through rose-colored glasses here, given my affection for the organization. I think that given how many women there are in design now, it is disproportionate in relation to the overall leadership of the organization. But right now, we have a female executive director, and we also have a female president. So I think the trend is moving in a good direction. Always room for improvement, always room for more strong women power.
So you're mentioning the proportions, and even though 60% of design students are female, only 11% of creative directors are women. Additionally, the median earnings for women are 20% lower than men, and when more women became designers, the overall wages fell by 34%. You're a strong, positive female role model, but did you ever feel at a disadvantage as a female creative? And what do you think we can do to overcome the gap?
Well, first I want to talk about the statistics. I think that what you're referring to is women creative directors in advertising. I'm not 100% sure, but I know that Kat Gordon's organization, which puts on the 3% conference, and that original 3% statistic was when she began her work in advocacy and raising the profile of women in advertising, the number was 3%. It's now, I believe, 11%, and I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
And so I believe, and I don't have statistics for you here, but I believe that the proportion of women in senior positions in the graphic design business, which is very different than the advertising business, I think it's much, much higher. I can tell you that from the number of people, both in my branding program, my graduate program in branding at the School of Visual Arts, and all of my undergraduate classes in design at the School of Visual Arts for the last 13 years, the proportion of women to men in the classroom is incredible. We're talking about 70, 80% women. I took a class with Milton Glaser in the summer of 2005, and it was a summer intensive. He talked about the overall profile of the class, and there were 30 people in the class, 27 were women. He said that 40 years prior, when he first started teaching that class, 27 of the people in the class were men, and only 3 were women. And so that's been the volumetric change. There are more women now in college, entering college, than men. I believe that there's at least an equal number of female primary breadwinners in the United States. So these numbers are changing, and we're really in the middle of a sea change. there is a tremendous change in the overall power structure that we're seeing in the United States. And I actually think that this last election is the vestiges of the holding on to that power by the previous power base. I think that in 10 years' time, the entire profile of the ownership of power in the United States will have changed. I think we had a tremendous setback, but that setback was based on my own assessment of there being a tremendous backlash to the progress and the power that we saw over the last decade, as well as a bit of complacency and possibly some shenanigans with the election. But I do believe very, very strongly that women have more opportunities now than they've ever had before, and they have more power now than they ever have before.
Did you ever experience any issues for being a female in the creative
I
industry?
had two instances of really sort of clinical sexual harassment in my very first job out of college in 1983. The very first job I ever got, I was hired on the spot at a magazine in the summer of 1983, and thought it was because the creative director was really impressed with my portfolio. I came to realize at around lunchtime when he sauntered up to my desk and asked me if I wanted to have lunch in that kind of want to have lunch kind of way, that it might not have been my portfolio that got me the job. I figured out a way to get out of that lunch date by saying I was busy with something else that somebody else in the editorial department had asked me to do, which was a lie. But I got out of lunch. He asked me the next day again, and I was able to finagle my way out of it again. And then the third day, that Wednesday, he hired another woman, a young woman, went up to her desk at lunch, and then she went out with him. And apparently they didn't had a torrid affair. And then there was an even more outrageous experience at that same company in that first year. So those are my two sort of classic, awful sexual harassment stories in the workplace. But I very well may have experienced other examples, but Bernardo, what's really interesting about my experience is that I never attributed any of my setbacks or any of the issues that I confronted about being a woman. I always thought it was because I wasn't good enough or smart enough or talented enough. So who knows? It never occurred to me that whatever I was experiencing was because of my gender. It very well could have been, but I never really saw it that way.
Before you mentioned that the past elections are sea-changing, and in 2016, Hillary Clinton recruited dozens of designers to do her promotional pins, and you were one of them. What moved you to take this invitation?
Well, Jennifer Keenan, who was the design director for the Hillary Clinton campaign, reached out to me. Jennifer was on a leave of absence from the agency that she co-runs with Bobby Martin, the agency Original Champions of Design, or OCD, one of the best names of any design firm ever. And she invited me to participate. And when you get an invitation like that, you don't say no. My biggest conundrum at the time was, how was I going to make something worthy of Hillary Clinton? And that was the only thing I was thinking about, was that it better be good. And I worked really hard on it and hoped that it was good. But it was an honor and something that I'll always feel really humbled, thrilled, and proud of.
And you were scared about doing something good. You made 3 beautiful pins, not just one.
Well, we had a choice. We had a choice of either doing one big pin, like a mega pin, or 3 smaller pins. And because Hillary's name is Hillary Rodham Clinton, and I love working with type, it was like, there it was. And I was actually surprised that more people that took the smaller 3-pin possibility, that they didn't do Hillary Rodham Clinton. I got lucky. So, yeah.
So based on this project or in general, what role do you think designers and creatives could have and should have on the world?
Well, I think that the condition of design and the condition of branding reflects the condition of our culture. And I'm really heartened and excited about what we're seeing in the marketplace now with the branding of social movements, which is highly democratized. Things like Black Lives Matter, Oscar's So White, the Pink Pussy Hat. We, the people, are creating identities, ways of understanding, movements that help gather people, that help bring people together, that help create change based on these shared values and shared beliefs. So I believe that more is happening now via branding than ever before, via design than ever before. I think that it's more important than ever to be able to communicate in smart, sound, strategic ways that are able to capture the imagination of any audience. And designers should be really, really good at that. And so I'm excited about the possibilities of both the disciplines of design and branding.
And you're mentioning branding specifically, and you're saying that we're doing more than we could have ever done before. Why do you think branding is so impactful, not just in the commercial world?
Well, branding is really what I define branding as is deliberate differentiation. How do you create a construct around anything at all? It could be a person, it could be a beverage, it could be a religion, it could be a car, it could be sneakers, it could be condoms, it could be French fries, whatever. How do you create deliberate differentiation that allows people to understand what makes this different from this? The fact that people are using these tenets of branding to create non-commercial entities that people can understand, share, and be part of is really what I believe the true purpose of branding is. A way to connect people without having to spend money, without having to buy anything, without having to get on the hedonistic treadmill, without any planned obsolescence, a way for people to join together under the umbrella of one idea. And that to me is incredibly exciting.
I want to switch gears and talk about another one of your accomplishments. You are celebrating 12 years as the host of the first and longest running podcast about design, Design
Yes.
Matters.
Yes.
You have interviewed nearly 300 design luminaries and cultural commentators, including Massimo Vignelli, Milton Glacier, Malcolm Gladwell, Barbara Kruger, and more. And I don't get tired of saying this, my favorite, anytime you're with Isaac Mizrahi, I just love those episodes.
You know, Isaac and I go so far back. I think that's part of what makes our interview so special.
And the first time I learned about you was you were interviewing Isaac on stage.
On stage at the AIGA Body Language Conference.
And I fell in love immediately. Why did you start Design Matters 12 years ago, and why do you think it's still so relevant?
I started Design Matters in a particularly low moment in my life. I had lost what I felt was my creative voice. Everything I was doing at that point in my life had a commercial connection. It was all about the return on investment of the branding that I was doing for fast food companies and over-the-counter pharmaceuticals and so on and so forth. And I had gotten a cold call, quite by accident, from a producer at a startup internet radio network. And he invited me to pitch a show about design. And I thought that meant that they were going to pay me to be a design impresario. And I very quickly came to find that what he was interested in my doing was buying airtime on their radio network, which was maybe a notch better than Wayne's World. But as I said, I was really feeling I was in this sort of desert of creativity and wanted something that didn't have any commercial value at all, something that I could just pour my heart and soul into and it to be a purely passion project. And so I thought, why not? It wasn't that expensive. I had saved a little bit of money and I thought, why not invest in something for myself? And I started doing the show in 2005, early February 2005. And the first 50 or so interviews I did with friends or friends of friends or friends of friends of friends. And then I started to branch out and started to reach out to people that I didn't know. And I started getting affirmatives about people being on the show. And I did 100 episodes on Voice America. And then Bill Drentel, the late, great Bill Drentel, one of the co-founders of Design Observer, invited me to bring the show over to Design Observer with the proviso that I improved the sound quality, because the original sound quality, I was doing the show with 2 telephone lines.
It was a live show.
It was a live show. It was the beginnings of the podcast world. There weren't really, I don't even know if the word podcast existed back then. There was certainly no podcast section on iTunes. And so I decided to hire a producer. I had just started my master's in branding program at the School of Visual Arts, and I was very lucky that they were building me a podcast studio so I could do my show live in front of my students. And so I started to work with Curtis Fox, who's been my producer ever since. We've now done another 200 episodes. As for why it's become as popular as it has, I have no idea. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. I have no idea why it's gotten as popular as it has. I'm able to track the stats now. Over 2 million people listen to the show a year. It blows my mind, blows my mind. What's happened in the last couple of years is that the show has changed from being a show primarily about design and designers to a show about how creative people design their lives. So I really try to interview people and take them through the trajectory of their careers, how they became who they are, what obstacles did they face, and I really try to have a sort of in-depth, long-form interview about the whole person. And how they became who they are. I find that endlessly fascinating. And so the show, while it's still called Design Matters, is really about all types of creative people.
In the Tim Fair show, you told the story on how you didn't learn about graphic design until your senior year in college,
Yes.
when you were the editor of arts and features for your school paper and learned about layout and design. You then took one design class and learned everything you knew about the practice.
I did learn everything I know during that class, but it helped.
At the time.
Yes.
Fast forward to today when Graphic Design USA calls you one of the most influential designers working today. Do you think your limited formal education was an advantage or a setback?
Oh, it was definitely a setback. I learned on the jobs, and I made lots of mistakes on the jobs. And I remember different creative directors that I was working with question the notion of my even considering myself a designer, given my early skill level with even basic layout and paste up. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was thrown into a position as the editor of this arts and features section of my school newspaper where we were required to put the paper together. And that's how I learned everything from making stats to developing type. But it really wasn't professional training. So if I had gotten some professional training early on, it might have helped. The first 10 years of my career, I really consider to be experiments in rejection and failure. Had I had a bit of a better education in any number of areas, it might have helped my overall career. However, I loved my education. I went to a state school, SUNY Albany, and it was a remarkable education, not only for the actual classes I took, which were primarily in English literature and Russian literature. I have a degree in reading, as I say now. But the friends that I made and the intellectual minds that I was exposed to with my professors, I consider myself incredibly lucky to have had the education that I had.
Is there anything we can learn from experience or any advice you can give those who had a later start in design?
Anything worthwhile takes a long time. I say it a lot. I think I'm proof positive of that. I started Design Matters in 2005. I was well into my 40s. So you can always find something in any area of your life to do that can surprise you. If you think you're too old, you're only putting an obstacle in front of you that is unnecessary.
And to wrap it up, you're in Philly because you're giving a lecture for AIJ Philadelphia.
Yep.
For those who can't make it tonight, and we'll see this later on, can you give us a little preview?
Well, I know a lot of designers, when they talk about their careers, talk about all their greatest hits. What did they do and how many awards they've won and this fabulous project and that fabulous project. I'm going in the exact opposite direction. I'm going to talk about my long history and relationship with rejection.
Thank you, Cinecore Media, for video production work. Thank you to Ryan Evans for his music. And thank you to Stacy Toseland and Lisa Weir for your overall support.